Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eacherberg, and today I'm bringing you an interview with Robin Wang, director of the short film Neither Donkey Nor Horse, which was selected as a finalist for the 2024 Student Academy Awards. Before I jump into the interview, please be sure to subscribe to the show in your podcast player so you can get all the newest episodes as soon as they are released. If you like the interview and want to hear more, please consider leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Robin Wang is a two-time College Television Award-winning director, producer, and screenwriter whose short films have screened at festivals including LA Outfest, Urban World, and Dead Center. He holds a bachelor's degree in English from Duke University and an MFA in film production from the University of Southern California. And he joins me on the podcast to talk about his latest short film, Neither Donkey Nor Horse, which has been selected as a finalist in the narrative category of the 2024 Student Academy Awards. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
So, your film tells the story of Dr. Wu, a Chinese doctor educated in the West, who is stuck between the ideas of modern medicine and traditional medicinal culture of his home during the Manchurian plague of 1910. Where did you first learn about Dr. Wu, and what inspired you to make this film about him?
I first came across the story of Dr. Wu in the March of 2021, and back then I was in China and US was in complete lockdown. It was a period of time that we were all stuck. I was very stuck creatively. So I was looking for, stories online, had a writing partner who came across the story of Dr. Wu. And the first time I heard about his story, and then I was immediately blown away by it, because just I did some preliminary research just by looking him up on Google, and it was shocking how history was eerily repeating itself, and to the point that it's almost and it is even more alarming and shocking that in back then, or even today, very few people heard of him and his story. And because over a century ago, it was our society, or our world is like a much more divided place, and people don't take science for granted. It was the age where history, where tradition clashes with modernity, and we're seeing these difficult cultural, social, and political changes at almost everywhere around the world. The 1910s is also the World War I, and then there was a new invention and new scientific breakthrough that came almost every year. So in that tumultuous period of time, it is even harder to talk about the common language, the universality of this is an accepted understanding of science and truth, and an idea that and that brings us all together as humanity in the face of crisis like this. So that was incredibly powerful to me. And then, but also knowing that because I was applying for a grant for the Sloan Foundation, that should be about stories about scientists. So I knew the story. I was very shook by it, but it was also I was also aware of the challenges that lies ahead, because it's not easy to pull off a period piece, let alone a period piece that's set in such a unique time and space that even as a Chinese person, I grew up in China and lived there for the first 15 years of my life. That in 1910 in Manchuria felt familiar yet very distant for me. So I did a lot of research on that, and that's a lot of different stories about prep.
Sure.
And the other thing that I kind of want to talk about was when coming across the story of Dr. Wu is that in the March of 2021, Google released a doodle, which they in which they used to commemorate important people that should be remembered. And I came across this doodle as well, which is about a group of Asian scientists making and distributing face masks. And I clicked on it. It was a story about Dr. Wu as well, and the Manchurian plague. And that was also an inspiration, and which actually was the end image of the film.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it a little bit. There's obvious parallels between what we see in your film in 1910 and what the world has experienced since 2020. Why did you feel like this was kind of the right moment in time to make a film on this subject?
I think just because we came right out of pandemic, and yet the world is not healing to a place of understanding and rather because I'm a Chinese person who more or less living the life of diaspora. I went to Singapore for high school, and I went to the United States for college, and I'm currently in Los Angeles. And still I hold the Chinese passport. So, and in the sense that the binarism that we see today of East versus West, China versus US, or all this this kind of division is really tearing my identity apart a certain way, because it feels like you always have to belong to a certain camp. It's either this or that. And even growing out of the pandemic, we're still seeing that kind of division across the world. And I think just by showcasing and highlighting a story that I felt we should all know, that nobody knows about how truth and science and this person who lives between these worlds actually became the solution, or the discovery of truth. I think it is just critically important. And as the title suggests, it's kind of rejecting a kind of binarism where you're only given the choice of, you have to belong to this camp or that camp, tribalism, and in a world that's full of division. So, yeah, I think by telling this story, we'll move ourselves towards a world that kind of sees us more as the division of us versus them, but see that there's the infinite possibility that lies in the middle, and that's where the truth lies as well.
For sure. And you mentioned a moment ago the title, Neither Donkey Nor Horse. And I know it's, I forget which character, but one of the characters uses it in the film itself. Tell me a little bit more about that particular saying and why you decided to use that as the title, beyond just the idea of not belonging in one place or the other.
Yeah, for sure. It was Master Yao who used it. It was like a 2,000-year-old Chinese idiom that when the species of mules were discovered and imported from the West, the Middle Asia, and then the idiom came out as this species belongs to neither the horse nor the donkey. So it's like an odd animal that does not belong to either of its parent species. It was used as a derogatory terms in the sense that it feels outcast, and it felt lonely, and it feels like being born to this world that you belong to neither of your parents, which is exactly the feeling of me or Dr. Wu. But at the same time, there's like so much untapped potential. There's great value to such beings, and it is exactly because the identity of being neither the donkey nor horse that it is able to see things that neither of those are able to see, which is kind of what I believe, that the truth about our world always lies in the middle, and it is always non-binary. And for example, in the U.S. election, you were always given two choices, but I believe that most of the Americans would prefer a choice in the middle, and there's no such a choice. So,
right, couldn't agree more on that.
Yeah. So like that, it is impossible to create a common terms for all kinds of human experience that says, you are the witch doctors, versus you are the Western scientists that represents the frontiers of civilization. And and the idea of civilization and savagery, which in this film, the Eastern and the Western doctors both think they represent civilization, and the other ones represent savage and barbaric, and and it's so relative, and it's so and there's so much prejudices that comes with the idea of us and versus them, the Orientalism versus Occidentalism, where truth and the discovery of new scientific discoveries that resides in incredibly humble terms. It's as elusive as the air particles, it is as primitive and crude as the humble face mask that people wear every day. And because of that overweening pride, or that prejudice that people carry by being by aligning themselves with either side of these tribes, that they're never able to see those things. And that's what Dr. Wu and people that are meant to be so ignored and underestimated, that caught in the middle, and that are able to discover these things, and is able to use his inventions to make the world a more understanding, better place.
Definitely. Now, you had sent me some materials about the film, had some behind-the-scenes images of making of the film, including some really cool shots of the makeup effects used to make the people look sick with this plague. Tell me a little bit about how daunting it was to tackle something like that with, I'm sure, dozens of actors in any given scene being made up to have this illness.
Oh, yeah, definitely. In the College Television Award events, I was able to meet Craig Mazin, who was actually one of my idols. He created Chernobyl in The Last of Us, and he was telling us about the process. And when I first wrote this, that Chernobyl was a very big influence. It was like a human-made disaster that sleeps you in, with all kinds of dread, but also rooted in a kind of cinematic believability that this is our world still, that without going so far that it became a zombie apocalypse or a genre film, right? So everything that I learned from Craig is how much rooted and disciplined you should be while you're making this kind of films, while pushing the boundaries for the horrors of science, I guess. But at the same time, it was a very meticulous process, I think, for us. There was a lot that I learned in terms of how the plague spreads, about how the bubonic and the pneumonic versions of the plague, we had different onset symptoms, but eventually lead to septicemia, which is and necrosis, which is the death of the tissues and on your skins, and that part earned the name Black Death, which is the death of the tissues and your skins. I had a friend who wrote a whole thesis for her undergraduate on the Manchurian plague. So she and I talked a lot about it. She sent me a lot of scientific journals and articles about the study of this of the plague in terms of how it spreads, because I'd never been around that person.
Yeah.
So I was studying the dead body that she was, the medical students were working on, and surprisingly, it took them a month to reach from the first cut, the wide incision, and working all the way through the rib cage before you can get to the lungs. And that's something a lot of people would miss in this kind of situation.
Sure, yeah.
You cut and then out comes the lung. It's a lot more difficult than that. And because you have to work through the rib cage, and it's a very visceral and daunting experience, you're actually feeling this. It is as a human body. I was through experiences like that. I was in this room, and it smelled of formaldehyde, and is incredibly visceral, that makes you want to throw up. And that was for me for the first time, and I felt it was very visceral and shocking experience, let alone for the people in the 1910. And so,
right,
all of that comes to the aspect of scientific accuracy combined with a kind of cinematic believability. Because what we're showcasing, so we developed 3 stages of the plague, in which the stage 1 is it was infected by almost like a common flu. People have reddened faces and coughing and pneumonia, and then it advances to the second stage, which is the septicemia. It is a poisoning of blood, and the bacterial infection, as Dr. Mevney explains, is spreads from localized, in the case of pneumonic, will spread from lungs to all over the body. And then you'll start to see the decomposition of skin tissues, and then the third stage will be necrosis, in which you have, which is the Black Death. And that's something that we tested with our special makeup artists, with our team, and when, in terms of what kind of degree of the necrosis should you get, because with this kind of film, it's very hard if you just push like a little bit harder, that it just became a zombie film.
Sure, right. You don't want that.
Yeah, you don't want that. And then it's it's precisely how believable, how rooted in our world it is, that makes the story even haunting, even more haunting, right? And then so in terms of balancing the tone of the entire movie, there are times where sound designer may have ideas of this sounds like super gory, this sounds like crackling of the bones and everything, which makes it more like a monster horror film, Alien, Romulus. And but there were, and during those times I would pull it back, and then I would say think of this more as a war film. Think of Occupied on the Western Front and how surgeons operates on the battlefield.
Makes sense. And speaking of kind of the design of things beyond the makeup, I really like the kind of the general production design of the film as well. You have that very dark and dingy Chinese infirmary where all these patients are being treated. And then by contrast, we see a very opulent conference room setting where the doctors and scientists are talking with the politicians. How did you go about kind of making these various spaces feel as real as possible, giving that believability, like you mentioned, to that time period where the film takes place?
Yeah, I think that was a great question. That because we shot this in hot summer LA, and creating those two distinct worlds are even harder in that respect.
And I think if I remember, the film takes place during the winter too, so it must be even harder.
During the winter of 1910, in a on a border town, colonized and multiracial. In well, then when we first came across this idea, this just very it felt very hard to execute, but we just really had to tap into the resourcefulness as filmmakers to really make it work. And surprisingly, I don't know how, but we kind of did it. But yeah, to your question of how these two worlds being built, and I think that just comes with it all comes to the theme of the story, which is the world of division and dichotomy, and there was I was reading a lot about the history of transition, of how China lets go of 5,000 years of its old practices, old beliefs, feudalism, monarchy, and since the Second Opium War, actually, over a period of 50 years, that the fabric of the entire Chinese society was shaken by the Western world, by new breakthroughs of technologies, about colonialism, and then there are people in the Chinese society that are, we have to learn from the West, we have to let go everything that we have. And then two, which is kind of like Master Yao. And then there's especially the common people of China, it's very hard for them to believe, to buy in the idea of science, to really enter, to letting go everything they've known for their entire life, and for their generations and their forefathers believed in, and to all of a sudden use microscopes, use telephones,
right.
Use
things we take for granted today.
Exactly, things we take for granted today. There was that super difficult cultural change, and there's big existential crisis for the entire society, and then and the people, especially the older generation who lived through it, and but the difference was huge in that period of in the early 20th century. That's why only a year after the Manchurian plague, there was a Republican revolution that overthrew the last monarch of China, the last emperor of China, and thus begins the age of the Republic and then the world. And China is starting to become like the on the political and societal level a new country. So what we were trying to accomplish with with world building is that there's one side of the world that's completely that held on to their generations of values, of humanism, of community, albeit deprived of everything you would see, like modern, right? So the structure was wooden, made of bricks and wood, and then there was no electricity, there was no hygiene, there was almost no anything. Yet people were kind of cling to each other as a community. And then there was also the other side, which is kind of Darwinistic, but also, but also the capitalistic side of the world, which was, the Western civilizations, and
Sure.
And there was like a group of them, including Japan and Russia, and there, because Manchuria was also a place of geopolitical interest, was at the edge of colonialism, and it was Japan and Russia and and China that was kind of competing sovereignty there. And then and it also comes with all kind of modern technology. There's like sound design wise, you can hear all kinds of metal, electricity. You can hear it as like the modern age. Where on the other side, you almost don't hear those things. Things are full of nature, like it's full of in the countryside. It felt pre-modern. And also one thing that's important is that when you place a certain character in either of these worlds, they feel out of place. They feel the antithesis of the other, and then they're conflicting with their environment. Like when Dr. Wu steps into the ward, like when Master Yao fits in the conference room. It felt like neither of those belonged to those spaces. So they were shocked. That just comes with the idea of, how far in distance these worlds have become. And then that's where the differences among us came from. And then that just makes Dr. Wu a being, as someone who belong to outcast by either of these worlds, somehow to navigate through these things, even more of an incredible story.
For sure, yeah. Mentioned at the top that you are a Student Academy Award finalist with this film. And are there any festivals or other screenings coming up for the film where people can check it out if they're interested?
We premiered at Telluride, and then we will screen at the St. Louis International Film Festival in November as well. And then we'll have receiving more news in September, I think. And then actually it was a pretty good start.
Excellent. So I have a couple of questions not specifically related to the film, but before I move on to those, is there anything else you want to touch on about Neither Donkey Nor Horse?
Oh, there's so much about it. But I just want to highlight one thing, that thanks, Johnson, for this podcast, because this is the first time I talked about film, like in the Q&A, ever since the film was made or anything ever, and before our premiere. So that's very special.
Wonderful. Well, I'm happy to be the first one to talk to you about it.
Oh yeah, sure.
Now, this might be the hardest question I ask, but if you had to pick your top 3 films of all time, what would they be?
Oh, this is one of the Letterboxd questions.
Yeah, Letterboxd does 4. I keep it down to 3.
So definitely for me, The Apartment by Billy Wilder is the epitome of screenwriting. Just from recent years, Nomadland was one of my favorites. I think 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days by Christian Mungu. A Separation. I could keep going, but there's so many. Yeah, I think I already named 3, which is.
Don't worry, those are some good selections, and some I don't think I've had recommended on the podcast before, so I'll add those in there. Now, similar type question: if you could invite any 3 movie characters to your next dinner party, who would they be and why?
Well, Jesus, can this be like does it include TV or just movies?
I try and keep it to just movies, but if you want to throw TV in there, I'll allow it.
I want to invite Gus Fring from Breaking Bad. He's like coolest villain. Such a profound question. Movie characters. I have to think back on movies. I think I like to invite cool villains to my dinner. So probably I would invite Mr. Sheldrake from The Apartment. Probably I would invite the Wedding Banquet, Eat, Drink, Man, Women to talk about life with me.
And do you have any books that you could recommend that you've read recently? They could be fiction or nonfiction and don't have to be related to movies.
Oh, I recently finished my last Jane Austen novel, which is Northanger, Abbey. It is like chillingly different, but I recommend everything that Jane Austen.
Excellent. We'll put that down and include all of her works in general.
Oh yeah, my favorite being Sensibility and Persuasion.
Gotcha. Well, before we wrap things up, do you have any other projects lined up that you're working on? And also, where can people follow you on social media to keep tabs on your work?
Yeah, so I'm definitely developing my next thing, which is me and my writing partner, Jesse, are doing this as a series, sort of mini-series that we're currently in development. I'm also trying to push forward with my first feature, but now this thing kind of puts me in a crossroad because usually people would not recommend doing a first feature as period piece. But I'm kind of like already, learn a lot from that. But at the end of the day, it's really the story that moves me. And currently there are a few. In terms of where people can follow me, they could follow me on my Instagram, which is at Robin_Z_Wang, WANG.
Excellent. Well, we'll put some links to those, to the Instagram there, and make sure people follow you so they can keep up to date and when you come out with some information about the next project.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks.
Well, Robin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Really appreciated you sharing your insights about the film and kind of where the story came from, and looking forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you again to my guest today, Robin Wang. His short film, Neither Donkey Nor Horse, was selected as a finalist for the 2024 Student Academy Awards. The Oscar Project podcast is written and produced by me, Jonathan Eacherberg, with editing assistance from Joshua Eacherberg. Please be sure to come back for my next episode, where I will speak with Tomas Orrego, director of the short film Fever. Until then, I hope to see you at the movies.